Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined this week by the best man of football journalism, Sunday Times football correspondent, Football Journalist of the Year, and an Aberdeen supporter still reeling from Sunday's sacking of Scottish Cup winning manager Jimmy Tilleen. Welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Jonathan Northcroft.
Thanks, Duncan. I was lost in reverie for a moment with that glorious summer's day when we won the Scottish Cup, and Jimmy was about to build a dynasty, and how quickly things change in football, eh?
Yeah, it's like Antoine Semenyo's £65 million release clause switch from Bournemouth to Manchester City, which I still think is likely to be the highest value transfer fee of this winter window. It is about to go through, but we've almost had more managerial changes in this January window than player transfers.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you, is it true that Jim Ratcliffe instructed his Manchester United staff to dismiss Ruben Amorim as soon as they heard that Tilleen was on the market at zero compensation cost?
Yeah, well, you're the first to join the dots, but I can exclusively reveal that no, not even Jim's that whimsical.
Not even as interim at Old Trafford.
Well, you know, some might say he's got more experience than certain other options, but...
We will, of course, go on to talk about Manchester United in great detail, and also Chelsea with the exit of Enzo Maresca and the appointment of Liam Rosenior as their new manager on an eternal contract with the usual Chelsea break clause, which means it's actually just a rolling one-year contract. But first, let's give you a bit of news about a manager who could be on his way to the Premier League in the summer. Who has been identified by various top Premier League clubs as a managerial target for some time. And that's Xabi Alonso, who has been included on Manchester City's list of potential replacements for Pep Guardiola. As we saw upon Enzo Maresca's sacking and the briefing that Maresca had informed Chelsea of his conversations with Manchester City to be a replacement for Guardiola, that didn't go down very well with the Catalan manager, who had one of his more discursive press conferences talking about his future after that came out. He has a contract until the end of 2027, but as we have discussed for years now, City have been preparing themselves for the point where he decides he's had enough and wants to move on to other areas, probably national team management, a break, and then national team management, and a lot of time on the golf course in between. And one of the candidates is Xabi Alonso, who joined Real Madrid in the summer but has struggled to consistently win at the Spanish club, to the point where there's been discussion about whether Madrid might part company with them. Point where Madrid have been defending their summer recruitment process, pointing out that they have one of the youngest and most valuable squads ever at present, and briefing that Alonso could have made better use of the resources he has. He plays Atletico Madrid in the Spanish Super Cup in Saudi Arabia later on Thursday evening. He's currently second in La Liga, 4 points behind Barcelona, 7th in the Champions League, 6 points off the top, and has suffered a sequence of just 2 wins in 8 matches at one point this season with Madrid. There is clearly the potential there for a parting of ways. Alonso had a strong reputation before he went to Germany, and then turned himself into probably the most desired manager in European football by taking the Bundesliga title off Bayern Munich with an undefeated domestic season, adding the German Cup to that trophy tally. He was the preferred choice at Liverpool before Arne Slot was given the job, but ultimately elected to join Madrid in a 3-year contract in the summer. Jonathan, what do you think of the idea as Alonso being the man to replace Guardiola? Is he? Do you think that's an ideal fit for Manchester City?
I think it would be a very good fit, actually. And fit is the right way to look at it, because it's the key thing about Alonso, I guess, is footballing education and style of play. I remember interviewing Alonso when he was at Bayern Munich. I'm trying to think about the year. Maybe it was about 10 years ago. And for a player who played for, the biggest managers around, and, spoke very highly of Jose Mourinho and of Rafa Benitez, etc., etc. But he told me about the experience of playing for Pep Guardiola, and for him, Guardiola was on another level, a pedestal. He was completely converted to Guardiola's way of seeing football, his positional play ideology, his methodology of incredibly detailed coaching, position orientated coaching, the possession play. It was he talked about it as being a sort of late career epiphany or whatever. So he is one of a number of Guardiola's disciples in coaching. I don't think he always was playing Pep football at Leverkusen, which is interesting. There was a sort of mix there with a German counter-pressing style. But one of the tensions at Real Madrid has been his attempt to impose a Guardiola-style positional football methodology on a club that's much more used to empowering players and leaning into individual talents and attacking with a certain freedom and forthrightness based around those talents. And it's less the results, I think, that have been his problem at Madrid, as the tension with bigger players and the style of play. So all of those things that have made him struggle at Real Madrid actually might be a strength for him at Manchester City, because he'd be coming in to replace the person that he idolised and that he plays, has quite similar football ideals to. So it would make sense from that point of view, for sure. And I think if he does, and maybe it's an if and when he does leave Madrid, I think those achievements at Leverkusen that you referenced, Duncan, I think those would still be seen as important enough to overlook any kind of failure at Real Madrid, and would still make him incredibly attractive to a number of big clubs. Because the other thing to say is, if you look at the coaches market out there, there aren't a lot of great, outstanding young candidates. So that also gives Xabi Alonso a kind of you'd almost have a pick of top jobs, even if he failed at Madrid, I think.
Yeah, obviously completely fluent in English, huge amount of degree of experience in the Premier League, and has been on that wish list of multiple top clubs for a long time. I remember several years ago now talking to a sports director and asking him about who the young talented coaches coming through were, while Xabi Alonso, I think, was still working at academy level. He identified him as a target, as someone who would turn into a top level coach, and got it dead right. I think interesting, if obviously all of this will be dependent on what happens in the Spanish season. If Alonso can turn that around, and Barcelona are not a perfect unit at present and win the Spanish league, I think it's unlikely that City will be able to access him. But you do have a scenario, given what's happened at Manchester United, given that their stated intention is to bring an interim in to follow the initial interim, Darren Fletcher, the interim, and they want to appoint in the summer. You could see a scenario where the Manchester City and Manchester United going head to head on trying to appoint Alonso. Let's talk about Ruben Amorim. I think every time you've been on this podcast in the little over a year since Ruben Amorim has been coach, we've talked about how it did not look like the project was going to work, and that Amorim's time at United was limited. As it turned out, the sacking came in a rush. It came with Amorim himself essentially looking to invite the dismissal with a highly aggressive press conference after a 1-1 draw with Leeds United, in which he criticised sporting director and the scouting department and said that he wanted to make it clear that he came here to be the manager of Manchester United and not to be the coach of Manchester United. I'm going to be like this for 18 months or when the board decide to change. I'm not going to quit. I will do my job until other guy is coming here to replace me. He ended up going, sacked the following morning after a meeting with sports director Jason Wilcox and chief executive Omar Barada, who was instrumental in his appointment. He ended up leaving with 15 wins from 47 Premier League games and 19 defeats, averaging 1.23 points per game, the lowest return of any Manchester United in the Premier League era. And to put that in context, the next worst was Ralph Rangnick at 1.54 points. His longest winning run was just 3 matches in all competitions, that coming against Rangers, Fulham and FCSB in the Europa League. His almost full season as Manchester United coach, he finished 15th with 44 goals only scored from 38 games in the season, their worst ever Premier League finish, and lost 23 of 63 games in all competitions, averaging a little bit better than his Premier League record, but not great at 1.43 points per game. And it included in that catastrophe of statistics, knocked out the League Cup by League 2 Grimsby Town. What's your take been on what's happened at Manchester United and the end of Ruben Amorim and what they intend to do to replace him?
Yeah, well, you used the word catastrophic, and those statistics back it up. And as you referenced, Duncan, I've thought for a long time that the Ruben Amorim project just was irredeemable, not just doomed and irredeemable, because without we don't need to be too complicated about it. He played awful football, to my mind, quite unwatchable football at times. The results were dreadful. There was a lack of improvement in most of the players. You can maybe argue a couple of them, Aiden Heaven maybe grew under Ruben Amorim, but most the
Amad Diallo, I think, would be probably the one who
Amad, albeit that I think maybe his rise had started under Erik ten Hag, and he played Diallo at wing back quite a lot of the time and was at best friend. But yeah, no, I'll take that. Okay, okay. But otherwise, little sign of improvement in players. That United invested quite heavily in. I think Lenny Euro, for example. As I say, a poor watch, and just a reign that just the progress was very, very minimal. I guess the irony is that he did get sacked at the point where things were marginally better, results were marginally better. Jim Ratcliffe did a podcast in October, Times Business podcast, where he talked about having faith in Amorim and I will judge him over 3 years. That's where he should be. We can't react to the knee-jerk journalism. We got to look at the underlying factors. I mean, the irony is that from that, at the point he did that podcast, United were actually 10th, and Ruben Amorim had gone up to 6th, and the results had marginally improved. But it was marginal. That's a point. For a 47 Premier League game run, 60 odd games overall, very, very small amounts of progress. So I think he probably should have gone sooner. And the devil's always in the detail, isn't it? It's in the timing. And why did they choose to push the button at that particular time? Because you've got to say, he was allowed to lose to Grimsby. He was allowed all this time of really mediocre Premier League results and allowed to play the football that he played. So the loss of faith in him was more than just a reaction to results or anything sort of tangible. There were intangibles, I think, behind it. And from what I understand, it was a general feeling, that kind of feeling that maybe strikes you in a relationship or whatever, that this just isn't going anywhere. And in particular, the signs, the changing to 4 at the back, and we can maybe talk about formations separately, because I do think that the formation thing hides the general principles that were the problem with Ruben Amorim. But you know, the change to 4 at the back, the change to a more attacking style, which yields a 4-4 with Bournemouth. It's a thrilling Manchester United style game. Okay, not a great result, but a proper old-fashioned United game. And then a defeat of Newcastle, albeit not the greatest second half, in fact, not at all a great second half performance, but another good result. And then to go from there back to quite a negative approach against Wolves, where he tried to match up the formation of the bottom team in the Premier League. And then a similar approach against Leeds, I think just left United feeling, you know what, we thought that we like a lot of his qualities. We thought that he would get used to the squad, get used to English football, use his system, but understand that there was a need to grow from that and improve the style of play and move towards a more expansive Manchester United style approach. And it's just not going to happen, because having shown signs of changing, his gut reactions to go back, and, you know, a coach that can be worried about Wolves. I mean, he had 5 defenders and 2 central defense, 5 defenders and 2 defensive midfielders on the pitch against Wolves. You know, when I say formations can be overblown, forget the numbers, forget the 3-4-3 or whatever it is. Just look at the individual player profiles. He had 6 defenders and 2 two defensive midfielders against Leeds. And the thing I've always thought about 3-4-3 is you're playing with an extra defender, with 1 less midfielder, and with no wingers, the way Amorim played it. So taking all of those things in the round, I think there's just a kind of realization that this guy isn't really evolving towards being a Manchester United manager in style. And then there's the press conferences and the discussions internally with Jason Wilcox and the feeling that I think gave United as well, which, as you alluded to, was a coach who had started to want out.
That for me is one of the fascinating things about this, because you have this brief from Manchester United that there was a conflict over system, with Wilcox proposing that he play more with a back 4 than play with a back 3. There was a fight between Wilcox and Amorim, which seems to have resulted in these 2 press conferences where he's spoken out and essentially invited the sacking. Then they change, and then you get this story of, we saw it wasn't quite working and he wasn't evolving in the way we wanted to. They hired a coach who everyone in football who'd spent any time watching Ruben Amorim knew was wedded to a back 3 system. And he said again and again and again and again and again, once he was at Manchester United, that was going to be his system. They had at least two opportunities to, if they had decided this wasn't going to work within the first year of Amorim's appointment, to usher him out the door without significant compensation. Amorim was on record in the summer as saying that he was ready to quit.
Yeah.
He also came pretty close to saying he was ready to quit after the Grimsby game. And when I say after the Grimsby game, I'm talking about the TV interviews immediately after the game. And I remember asking Manchester United off record whether they expected him to quit in the aftermath of that game, and talking to people in Portugal to see where close to him, where they thought his head was, and the answer was, we're not sure. We're not sure what he's going to do next. He decides to stay. They run it through to this point where there is a direct conflict, and then they sack him mid-season without a long-term replacement set up. So, if the story is that we saw this wasn't going to work well, you would have thought they'd have been working towards having a long-term appointment replacement ready to step in when they push the button. And they end up paying a large amount in compensation to Amorim and his staff because it's a sacking, not mutual consent, not possibly even the coach quitting. That seems to me quite telling about how Manchester United are organised as a football club.
Yeah, look, and this comes after the sort of complete reverse ferret on Ten Hag, doesn't it? Who was backed and then sacked. I would take issue with the idea of a fight with Jason Wilcox simply because, kind of knowing a little bit about the characters involved, I don't think Jason Wilcox is a fighter, and I'm told that those discussions weren't necessarily confrontational or weren't designed to be confrontational, but they became emotional. But I don't think we're talking about a character in Wilcox who particularly egotistical or would wield power in a kind of tearing a strip off someone way. But for sure, as I understand it, there was a discussion, and it was more, and it wasn't so much about you need to play back four. It was more you need to start being more positive here. I think if Ruben Amorim had said, you know what, I'm going to stick with my back three, but I'm actually going to flex the system, and I'm going to reintroduce wingers here, or I'm going to drop someone else into midfield, or there's a way to play that system in a more attacking way, which I think Antonio Conte managed it at Chelsea. So I think it was more about, my goodness, when are we going to see a more positive approach? And it's I use the kind of comparison of that moment in a relationship when you just think, you know what, this isn't going to work. I mean, that can come quite suddenly for you. I guess what's interesting here is we're talking about a football club and a business. You're part of the job of executives, I suppose, and ownerships is to see these things coming. And this does seem to have crept up on United, this feeling. So there seems to be a failure to anticipate, because as you rightly say, Duncan, this could have happened after Grimsby. He made similar noises last season when he talked about it being the worst Manchester United team ever. When he said that, I thought, well, he's actually trying to get out already, because he's effectively saying, I can't do anything with this. And that was only a couple of months into his reign. So that's what's interesting. The interim thing, I mean, it's interesting looking at Ineos's history. They do like an interim. If you look at Nice, they've done it a couple of times in their stewardship in Nice, and then they also like going back to the future, as it were. They've just reappointed Claude Puel, who was Nice's successful manager 10, 15 years ago. So this kind of both going to an interim and also going to somebody who evokes the glory days, i.e. a Fergie protege, is quite an Ineos sort of bit of behaviour in terms of club ownership.
So we have Darren Fletcher in for Wednesday night's 2-2 at Burnley, expected to remain in charge for the weekend. And then they have conversations with a host of former players and actually former coaches, in particular, most notable, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who was last seen at Manchester United losing 5-0 at home to Liverpool and 4-1 to Watford during his long trophyless reign between December 2018 November 2021. Since then, he's been sacked by Besiktas of Turkey in August after elimination in the Conference League playoffs. Another candidate, Ruud van Nistelrooy, who was very successful in his interim role between Erik ten Hag and Ruben Amorim, in that he won 3 of his 4 games and got
two against Leicester.
and then got the Leicester City job off the back of that, and was sacked after 27 games in charge, averaging just 0.67 points per game. Hasn't coached since. And Michael Carrick, who I think did a reasonable job at Middlesbrough, but clearly isn't seen as being the long-term manager of Manchester United. And so you have this situation where they're going back to one coach who failed at, or thinking about going back to one coach who failed at Manchester United as a stand-in to get them to the end of a season, which is actually very important to them from the business perspective, in that they need at least to qualify for European football, and ideally qualify for the Champions League, and are ironically in a position, because of the way the Premier League has panned out this season, where that is a possibility if they have a strong finish to the campaign. Do you not find it strange that they're looking at this interim approach rather than trying to get the best man for the job and bring him in now?
I don't actually, because I think look, we've said this before, right? But they have to get this next permanent appointment right.
Yeah,
because every time they get it wrong, they slip further behind. So they are prioritizing a process, which I expect to be a proper process this time, to get the correct man. And if that means the interim solution, as I say, Ineos quite like an interim solution anyway. Mm-hmm. I can understand it actually in this, because I think the key thing is to get to the summer of 26, when a number of coaches are going to be available that aren't available now, and be in position to get the right one. And what happens from next week onwards is crucial. It's the identities of the interims. I mean, United they've now had 5 of Fergie's ex-players in charge since Fergie left, all initially on interim deals. Giggs, Carrick's done it before, Fletcher's done it now, Van Nistelrooy's done it, and Solskjaer's done it before, and they're gonna do it again. I expect it won't be Darren Fletcher. I expect it'll be someone else, one of the other 3 that you mentioned, because they've got more experience. So this is a club that just keeps losing its way, and to reorientate itself keeps going back to Fergie or someone who's got Fergie's stardust. And it's this continual sort of feedback loop, as it were, of trying to remember what Manchester United is supposed to be and reaching back to Fergie. So the fact they're doing it again shows a lack of, I suppose, independent vision, because you'd expect by now those in control of United to not need to keep going back to the past to try and work out what Manchester United are supposed to be. I think of the candidates, I actually think if you look at Ollie as a interim, he had a great spell as an interim. Ollie as a permanent manager was a different thing, and I actually felt that he, in some ways, was the best manager they had since Fergie. In some ways, because there were more moments under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I think, that United looked like Man United than at any other time in the whole. But it did peter out and end badly. And for that reason...
And they didn't win anything.
And they didn't win anything. And no, and you're right, it's all very well me got identity and youth and blah, blah. They didn't win anything, and that's true. And they keep forgetting that the DNA is about winning, right? And I'd absolutely take that point. I think there's a little bit of danger. I'm a fan of Ollie as a person. But I think there'd be a danger in going back to him now, because he had that impact as an interim, first time round because he came in with the energy and he came in with the personality and the freshness. He wouldn't be able to do that again. He would come, you know, you're right to reference, he would come in as a guy who was last seen losing 4-1 to Watford. So he wouldn't have that bounce. I think Carrick would make much more sense from that perspective, or perhaps Van Nistelrooy, but I think it'd be weird to go back to Ollie again. And you raised an interesting point about how this affects the rest of the season. I'm not sure, because in the statement there was they thanked Ruben Amorim for sort of raising the club to 6th, and then said, we think that the best chance of a high finish is making a managerial change. And I'm not sure about that bit. You know, for all my reservations about Ruben Amorim, I think keeping him may just have been a better guarantee of being in the top 6 or 7 than making this change. This change is a gamble in terms of this season. Can an interim get there? I don't know. It's amazing we're here again with United, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, you mentioned the long-term replacements. We should talk about the candidates there and the argument. And yes, there is a strong argument that you wait until the summer where it's easier to access particular individuals. And I think here that really applies to the guys who are coaching international teams and waiting for the World Cup. So Thomas Tuchel was a candidate last time around. He was involved in that managerial speed dating that Tim Ratcliffe and co did as they were looking to get rid of Ten Hag at the end of his final full season in charge. Mauricio Pochettino is again a candidate. Again, was a candidate at that time, and Carlo Ancelotti. And Ancelotti, I think, is interesting because Ancelotti, I heard a long time ago, in fact, when he was Chelsea coach, from someone close to him, that he has always coveted the Manchester United job and wanted an opportunity to do that before he retired. I mean, this was at a time when Manchester United was a better functioning football club.
Was it? in the days when it was a bucket list item, yes. and not a type of. But
let's say he still has that interest. And yes, you do have to wait to the summer for these 3. But Oliver Glasner, Andoni Iraola, Marco Silva, all Premier League base candidates. All, I think, talked about and all makes sense from the perspective. If you look at Manchester United's recent recruitment policy, they've become highly focused on Premier League analytics. So the idea you take someone who's working in the Premier League at the moment and performing well would make sense from that perspective. But they are all out of contract at the end of the season. So if you think that Glasner, Iraola or Marco Silva is your choice for the job, the compensation package involved in getting them out of Crystal Palace, Bournemouth and Fulham is not going to be a huge one. So again, if you had properly prepared for this, as opposed to reacting to what you described quite accurately as an emotional upset, surely you'd have one of them ready to go.
You would. No, look, what you're outlining is how a real established top club operates, isn't it? Yeah. You know, you've just in the same way that you have an array of scouting tools that identify, and this is what should happen, identify a successor in each playing position that you've got. You should always also be doing the same managerially, and the top clubs do that. You know, top clubs know who's on the list in case a change ever needs to be made, and clearly Manchester United don't. Clearly they haven't got to this point, and they are starting from a position that they shouldn't be in. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's given that that is the case, it is important to to work out exactly what's needed first, I think. I'd expect data to come into it. But I think that, I was speaking to someone in recruitment about this, and with Manchester United, it often comes back to recruitment, doesn't it? And they were making the point that what United have never done at any point in the post-Fergie years is, as he put it, taking the medicine, right? They've never said to themselves, right, we are a long way behind where we need to be. We are going to need 3 years here, and we're going to need to build in stages, and Liverpool did this when they brought Klopp in. Arsenal have done this, maybe slightly by accident and maybe not totally by design, but that's what they've done with Arteta. And I think Jose talked about doing this at United, but wasn't given the span to work in. But it would be that idea of saying, this is going to take us 3 years, or this is going to take us 5 years, and we need to do this in steps. So what we need to do is recruit a certain type of player, and maybe even a certain type of coach, to get us into the Champions League regularly. We get in the Champions League regularly, we get the extra revenue, we get the higher class of player we can attract, and then we move to the next step, which is challenging for the title, and finally you win the title. Because it's pretty much never done instantly, and it does strike me that, again, United need to properly assess how long it's going to take them to get there, and then appoint maybe they're not looking to appoint the league-winning manager now. Maybe they're looking to appoint either the guy that's going to grow into the league-winning manager, and I suppose they hope that would be Ruben Amorim, or the guy that's going to get them regularly into the Champions League, and then they bring someone else in for the finishing touch. I don't think that sort of strategic thinking has gone on at Old Trafford in all those post-Fergie years. So, of the candidates, I think Ancelotti is a very interesting, alluring name. Actually, I hadn't really considered him, but with him, he would. I mean, he nearly got Everton challenging for the Champions League, so I think he would certainly be a manager that you could trust to get up to a certain level. I think the outstanding candidates at the moment are actually Tuchel, but I'm not sure he'd go there. Because of the experience he had last time, the speed dating, as you put it. And Unai Emery, who is doing this has done an incredible job at Aston Villa over 3 years, and continues to sort of power that club forward. But I don't think they will go for him because of the control he'd want, because of the way he'd want to impose himself. So you are looking at the Glasners, Iraolas, Silva. Real outside bet might be a Fabian Herzler, but it might be looking at that type of younger Premier League manager. I know Glasner's in his 50s, but young in their development, in Premier League terms, who might take you that next step, grow a squad, and then you reassess after 2 or 3 years, instead of continually looking for the magic solution, which I'm not sure they could attract that anymore. They tried that with Jose Mourinho. He did come in, he won. Could they get a Jose Mourinho level coach anymore in terms of where Jose was at that point in his career? So that's why it might have to be a stepping stone manager. But I don't think anyone at Manchester United wants to hear that. I don't think the fans want to hear that. And I'm pretty sure Jim Ratcliffe wouldn't want to hear that.
Look, you're right to talk about having a long-term strategy and working out a way to implement it. I think the irony here is they have actually talked that game. They're talking about project, what is it, 2030? When the
2028 actually.
2028. Okay.
They're gonna win the league, yeah.
Win the Premier League again. I think it was within 5 years of when they first made that announcement, and then kind of setting the intermediate bars relatively low. I think it's interesting also, you talk about hiring a coach who can turn into a top level coach and turn into a winner. I think, and I was having this discussion with someone involved in recruitment today about what Manchester United have done with that executive team that Ratcliffe brought in and emphasised very heavily when he came into managerial control and partial ownership of Manchester United, was that he wanted best-in-class executive team, that everyone needed to be replaced, and he wanted to get the best guys in and set the framework for the new coach. That this person was saying, if you look at what Manchester United have done with centre forwards, they keep signing development projects. They keep signing someone like Rasmus Højlund, Joshua Zirkzee, Benjamin Sesko, who are not finished projects, who they believe can turn into top centre forwards in the world. And he was underlining how difficult it is to turn into a top centre forward in the world at a club of Manchester United's stature. It's not an easy thing. It's one of the harder positions and most exposed positions in football. And then we talked about how the same thing has happened with their executive staff. If you look at those guys that Ratcliffe appointed, none of them in each area were what you would say were top of their field, established top of their field, working at a club of Manchester United's dimension, financial dimension and supporter dimension, for several years with success. You got Dave Brailsford, who barely worked in football, had been quite a controversial figure at Nice and has been to a certain extent sidelined since. You have Jason Wilcox, who had a great reputation as an academy director at Manchester City and was cherry-picked by Southampton off the back of it to become director of football there. Lasted less than a season at Southampton before being taken by United. Southampton were relegated in that year. So Wilcox is now doing a job that he's never done at a high level before. As being director of football of a club of that dimension. And that's not to say he can't do it, but they're depending on him developing into that man, developing into Chiki Bergiristan, for example. Omar Barada, excellent reputation as deputy to Ferran Soriano at Manchester City as chief executive, involved in transfer business, helped execute deals with Chiki Bergiristan, but never been a chief executive before at any level, and certainly not at a club of the dimension of Manchester United. Then when they get to appointing the coach, they allow him, who has never appointed a manager before in his career, to drive the process, to choose Omar Barada and push for him. Probably the best reputation of all of Ratcliffe's appointments was Dan Ashworth, highly successful with the FA, well regarded at Brighton, poached by Newcastle United, and there's arguments within the Newcastle United about how good they thought he was, and they're also, I can say, I've heard rumblings that Ruben Amorim wasn't very impressed with Dan Ashworth and the way he worked during his time at United, but he was laid off by the club inside 6 months at a cost of over £4 million. Even he hadn't been in the same role he was given at Manchester United at an absolute top football club before. So all of those are kind of like, we're going to hire someone who we think can turn into the right person to do the job, but we don't actually know he has the ability to do it because none of them had the experience actually doing that level of job before.
No, I think that's a fair portrait, and I think the issue is all the punts that you're taking on people all together at the same time, because you can have a new director of football. I mean, don't think Edu had done it before Arsenal, and
he'd been director of football. Corinthians and the Brazil national team, which is obviously a different job.
I stand corrected. The Corinthians would certainly, fair enough. I mean, look, if you look at, Billy Hogan at Liverpool, chief executive, hadn't done it before in football. Yep. Richard Garlick at Arsenal, but around, those examples are people who are in new roles within successful organisations, and not, as you say, alongside a whole lot of other newish people, all trying to sort of find their way. And I believe Dan Ashworth, it was a personality, it didn't fit. I know Dan a little bit. He's very methodical, very measured, very strategic, very quiet, very low key, and that doesn't necessarily fit into Jim Ratcliffe world, shall we say? And you just need to listen to a Jim Ratcliffe podcast to understand, the type of character he is. So, I think there was but I think that was an opportunity missed by Manchester United or missed by Ineos, because Dan has shown himself in his career to be a superb, basically, builder in terms of he's not necessarily the guy that will do the thing, but he's the best guy at appointing the guy that will do the thing.
Yeah.
So when he revamped England's performance, it was as much by putting the right people in place as anything he did himself. And that's a skill. The delegation's a skill, but bringing in someone like Dave Redden as a performance director and letting him drive a lot of the marginal gains and cultural changes, that's the kind of stuff Dan Ashworth does. I think in Newcastle's recruitment, a lot of it was down to the scouting network, which continues to yield success. But he empowered them. And I think if he'd been allowed at United, go and appoint your head of recruitment, go and appoint your head coach, go and revamp the departments, I think he'd have been the ideal man to do that. But they wanted somebody different. I think Jim Ratcliffe wanted more of a go-getter, a transfer guru, recruitment guy. So when he appointed Dan Ashworth and said he's a 10 out of 10 operator, he's best in class, I just don't think he understood what Dan was 10 out of 10 at doing. He thought he was 10 out of 10 at doing something different. And that comes back to an owner not understanding what they're looking at.
Let's talk about another club where there are questions about to what extent the owners understand what they're looking at and what strategy they're trying to follow. And Chelsea Football Club, another high-profile dismissal, in this case, perhaps more of a mutual exit rather than a straightforward, we've had enough of you, you're out. Enzo Maresca leaving on New Year's Day after exit talks on New Year's Eve. There seemed to be, I'll let you talk through what happened there, Johnny, but there seems to be quite a lot of parallels in that you have a club that doing not a great run of recent results, but actually doing pretty well overall in the table and in the Champions League, not in a terrible position. You could see the potential for them to meet their targets for the season. And the coach being moved out over, at least partially the reason being a dispute with the sporting director, with the medical department, with the other elements of the club, rather than simply on the performances he was delivering on the field.
Yeah, I think there are huge parallels, and they both speak to where football is now, which is the era of the powerful manager, the unicorn coach, as it were, is receding. It's not over completely. I just referenced Unai Emery, who runs Aston Villa, right?
Yes.
And Arteta's very powerful at Arsenal, and Guardiola's still Guardiola. But beyond them, clubs are moving ever more towards big structures, multiple executives, multiple sporting directors in Chelsea's case, systems laid down by ownerships, and the head coach sort of slots into that and has to go along with it. And Enzo Maresca, having become, world champion, if you want to term it that way, he probably would, in terms of winning the Club World Cup and winning Chelsea the Conference League and getting them in the Champions League. You're fulfilling his brief last season. Expected to be, I suppose, listened to more, to have more say in who played, to not have to to not have to go along with the medical department all the time, wanted to have a bit of influence on recruitment, and that was never going to happen at Chelsea. Never. When you think of what happened to Pochettino before him, or you think how small the amount of time it was that Thomas Tuchel lasted, a strong character in that setup. So this is where football is, and I think Maresca's the latest at Chelsea to realise that, you know, the head coach there is a cog in the BlueCo machine, shall we say? A very important cog, but not somebody wielding the pushing the buttons of control. But at least, you know, I think the contrast with Chelsea and Manchester United is, at least there's a consistency at Chelsea. They've been that way for several years now.
Yeah.
And I think if you take that job, you know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
You know the style of play they want as well, by the way, because that's kind of laid down. You know the players are going to sign. You know the recruitment policies based around youngsters. So you actually do know what you're signing up for. And I think that maybe the difference is, if Ruben Amorim was here, he would say, I didn't really know what I was signing up to at Manchester United. That wasn't clear.
Well, he's in that press conference, he pretty much said that he didn't sign up to that, and he expected to have more control. But let's talk about a couple of the complaints that have come from Enzo Maresca, or at least from his camp, and I think we're safe to say they've come from Enzo Maresca. And one is that he was advised to select certain players from that huge squad that Chelsea have to maintain their transfer value, rather than for the purposes of winning an individual football match. And the second was that he was instructed as to which players he could use when, according to the medical department's assessment of how many minutes they were capable of playing in a given match. What do those two things, those two elements of the way BlueCo work, the BlueCo machine operate, tell us about the priorities of BlueCo? Because they don't, certainly the first one, and I would argue the second one as well, has the potential to have a similar effect. They don't seem to be primarily focused on achieving the best on-field results.
No, that to me is the tension at the heart of BlueCo and Chelsea, because it does seem to be a trading model, an asset growth model, as much as it is a winning model. And, you know, the culture under Abramovich was very much a winning model. And that's, you know, and that's where the modern Chelsea gets its identity from. That's why supporters are angry now, because they still chant Abramovich's name. They were reared on Jose Mourinho, Roman Abramovich, win, win, win. Don't win for 5 games, sacked. Doesn't matter what you've won before. And this is a different way of doing things. I found it really interesting in Liam Rosenior's introductory video that he filmed for Chelsea TV, that it's a very short clip, but he mentions specifically that he was in charge of Strasbourg, who were the youngest team in Europe with an average age 20.8. So he's giving the owners what they want to hear, because their project is young players who you can grow as assets, and you trade some of them and you move on to the next thing. And when it comes to the medical department overruling or leading, dictating how many minutes people play, well, that is also that sort of looking at players very much as sort of assets that have to be, you know, husbanded and over a period of time. And that's the most important thing. I mean, the principle of, by the way, of limiting players' minutes is nothing new. And I guess the thing that surprised me was that you know, most top coaches now use periodization, or a form of periodization. And your good friend Rui Faria is the godfather of that, right? And it surprised me that maybe Chelsea have to have this system, because with good periodization, you'd have to have a divide between a medical department and a head coach. You know, the whole point of periodization is it's all rolled into one. So it surprised me there that Chelsea haven't sort of given that Rui and Jose Mourinho brought periodization to England at Chelsea specifically. It's interesting that they've moved away from that to the extent that there's a medical department versus coach divide on how many minutes people should play.
Well, the Americans did, of course, radically overhaul the medical department when they came in, getting rid of the doctor and most of the individual practitioners. I'm told that when they spoke to at least one of those individuals who was removed, they were told that it's nothing to do with your work. We just don't want people from the old regime here.
Wow.
But they went through a period of bringing in, I think, physios who hadn't worked very much in football before and were known for working with celebrities and had a terrible track record of injuries off the back of that, and now have this system where, you know, I was talking to a coach about this and the problems with it. I think you're absolutely correct to identify if you have the coaching staff working sympathetically with the medical department, you can have a very successful setup where you maximise player availability and you use the players in the right matches when you need them. And there's a great deal of flex in this. I mean, there seems to be this idea that you can chart how many minutes a player should get for a given game, depending on how much ground they've covered, how much high intensity work they've done in previous matches and on the training ground. And yeah, I'm sure models can be built, algorithmic models can be built saying this player's in the red zone, you shouldn't use them anymore. But talking to real experts on this, they say there's only a certain amount of information you can get from that data. And a big element in injury is psychology. And part of the skill of coaching and handling players is getting them in a position where they're comfortable playing in the key game where you need them. But once you set up a medical department whose success or failure within the organisation is determined by how frequently or what percentage of players they keep fit, and you give them a remit where they can say, no, Enzo Maresca, you can't use this guy in this game. You can use Reece James in this game. You can only use him for 60 minutes. Then surely you're setting up a system where their priority is going to be maximising their numbers, not on-pitch results.
Correct. It actually doesn't necessarily matter to the medical department whether you win the game or not. They're going to be judged on player availability, aren't they? And the head coach, given he's at Chelsea and it's a fragile position, is going to be judged on whether he wins the game. So there's a basic clash there, isn't there? And what periodization does is it puts the coach at the center of or that makes the coach think holistically about psychology, player minutes, training plans, tactics, and winning matches, outcomes, all in one. And they're all rolled into one, and it's an ongoing approach. It's embedded in your thinking. And to me, periodization has become so successful that I'd have thought it should be now by as much an orthodoxy in football as I don't know. It's unchallengeable to me.
Tactical analysis of the opponents.
Tactical analysis, yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Good example.
To mention something else that Jose Mourinho and Rui Faria brought into English football in great detail and changed the English game.
Using data and scouting, whatever the orthodoxies are. So yeah, it's just really interesting, and it again speaks to this idea of competing departments who may have different objectives, all trying to please a boss. And then you might then look at something like the 5 sporting directors through the same lens and think, if you have 5 sporting directors, is their priority to work together, or is it to each individually impress the boss? I don't know. So strange.
So you mentioned Liam Rosenior, who's come in with a contract until 2032, taken from Strasbourg, who Chelsea say they will pay fair market rate compensation to their feeder club for the coach's signature. There is obviously a lot of fit there in that Rosenior has worked with those 5 sporting directors to a certain extent over his year and a half at Strasbourg, worked for even longer periods with several of them. We mentioned this in last week's podcast, and Sam Jewell, Paul Winstanley, having previously been at Brighton when Rosenior was starting his now quite a long period of preparing himself to be a Champions League coach, which he's achieving for the first time. And then Lawrence Stewart, who was with him at Hull, was an analyst at Hull when Rosenior had his first full-time appointment after a short interim period at Derby County, where he did well. This actually looks like an intelligent, thought-through appointment by Chelsea. But having said that, perhaps a big risk for Liam Rosenior in his career to take something of this profile under these circumstances as his first Premier League job. What's your take on the appointment and how you expect Rosenior to do at Chelsea?
Yeah, look, there is a logic to it, obviously, that he's been working in the BlueCo system, has impressed with this style of play, which I think is a little bit more adventurous than Enzo Maresca's, but along similar principles, so that there's an attraction there. As you outline, will fit with the sporting directors very well, and also is, I believe, close to Bedad Egbali. The two of them have forged a strong relationship over the time Rosenior's been in the BlueCo system. So all of that is good, and I think one of the biggest things for any Chelsea coach is managing upwards. So Liam's got a big head start there, and I don't know him very well, but I know Wayne Rooney very well, and Wayne couldn't have spoken more highly about Liam when they were at Derby together. He often said, "Look, I'm the manager, but Liam's the coach, and he's so good on the training ground that I leave him to do that because I can't coach like that." And he was quite honest about that. And when you think about actually just Derby, let's sort of delve into that. The what he managed to get, the pair of them managed to get out of that situation, but particularly Liam in this conversation in terms of the coaching. I mean, if you think Chelsea's a difficult place to work, Derby at that point were Mel Morris receivers, nobody knowing if they were getting paid, if the training ground was even going to be open, all that kind of stuff, and that was a difficult place to work, and the coaching job that Liam did there was huge. Everyone, and I think you know him better than me, but everyone who's encountered him speaks of what a bright guy he is, what a sharp football brain, but what a kind of empathetic person he is, and his as a human being, he seems to be first rate. So, look, there's a lot of qualities there. It's brilliant to see a young English manager getting a chance at one of the big clubs as well. The questions for me are, as mentioned, this fan base that's pretty disgruntled at the moment, and it's disgruntled with the ownership. So will they just see him as a BlueCo man, and how does he handle that? And then I guess one of the questions is he hasn't worked under this level of scrutiny with the scale, the size of player that he's going to encounter in that Chelsea dressing room. So those are question marks. But anything's going to be a bit of a gamble at the moment because of the specific, the kind of coach that BlueCo need to fit into their system isn't a big coach. It's somebody who will work within the structure. So they're never going to be going for the big coach. Maybe Pochettino will be the last one of those that they do. The other hires, Graham Potter, Maresca, now Liam Rosenior, very much work within the system type of guys. So the things I said about can they do a big dressing room, blah, 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 I think the profile coach they're going to go for, there's always going to be those questions. There's a lot of tools that Liam Rosenior's got that gives him a good chance of succeeding.
Yeah, I think he's also a pragmatic coach. I think at Strasbourg he started with the BlueCo style of play and was prepared to adjust it during the season when it wouldn't work. He talks about changing his defensive formation almost for every game. He's super passionate about football and about coaching and about achieving, developing as a coach and achieving the best he can in the game, which I think is an underestimated trait of importance in football. Something you become more aware of as a football journalist when you meet people in the game, and some who don't enjoy football. You'll know, Johnny. You can have interviews with footballers who will talk about the game itself being stressful for them. I think you're right to mention the difficult context in which you'll work. I think from a dressing room perspective, the more complicated thing there is that they have this bizarre structure where they don't have any older players and they don't really have a natural culture of leadership within the dressing room. So Rosenior's going to have to establish that, but the advantage he has is he had to do exactly the same thing as Strasbourg, and everything we hear from Strasbourg is he did that very well and was respected by the players and got results out of them. And then, of course, what we've been talking about in this podcast is the question mark of whether BlueCo's actual target is to get the best results on the pitch. Which means that Rosenior's going to have to deal with trying to achieve that because he'll want to do it himself and he'll want the supporters to enjoy that, while the context of the club is one in which maintaining transfer value is considered to be, and flipping multiple players every season to try and bypass financial fair play rules is considered to be either desirable or at least necessary for their continued existence.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that made it difficult for Maresca was that continual influx of new players and the need to then play them and give everyone minutes and lose certain players and almost start again. I mean, if you look at what Chelsea did in the wide positions over the summer, the one that stands out is selling Madueke and buying Gittins, and it's like you kind of you're getting a younger model of the player you've actually built up to being almost a top player, and then you sell him because it makes sense, and then you're expecting the coach to start again, and they did that in several other positions, and I think that is difficult for a coach who wants to go on a journey and actually build towards winning. So that's going to be difficult for him. But I'd mentioned managing upwards and maybe that ability to plug into the ownership and the sporting director group may allow him to influence things more than Maresca did, because I think Maresca's way of influencing was emotional and confrontational, and that was never going to work with the Chelsea hierarchy. Yeah,
and I don't think Rosenior will work in that way. I think you're right to highlight the transfer window from Chelsea. It was perceived as being a success from the perspective of raising lots of money and addressing their financial fair play problems. But what you get is this massive flux of players, and I think a general consensus is the squad was no better than the one that they started the summer with. Probably not significantly worse, but definitely no better. And for a coach, that in normal circumstances, you don't want that degree of churn if you're not getting improvement. One area where Rosenior, I think, will definitely have an advantage on top of that aspect of being able to manage up is in communication. Maresca was not a great performer with the press in communication to the outside world, and Rosenior will come across well. He is intelligent, he's well spoken, he's thoughtful. They're going to get an immediate step up in that domain, and hopefully, and I think there's a good chance they'll get a step up in other domains of management too.
Yeah, and I mentioned the fans, but I think he's got a chance of connecting with them because of his comms, because of how he is, and it could be that one of the issues that the supporter base has got is this a club which had such big characters and such a strong sense of what the identity was. That kind of the contrast between the peak Abramovich and Jose Mourinho era to now is, as I said earlier, still painful for some supporters. Maybe Liam Rosenior can be a character that can fill that gap because of his personal skills and his own story. But it is a lot to ask a young coach.
Yeah. Let's finish up with hero and villain. Johnny, who would you choose as your hero of the week?
Well, you mentioned him at the top of the show, Antoine Semenyo, and I, he's on the brink, as you say, of a move to Manchester City, and I just think he's got a brilliant journey. He was a player that was released by Crystal Palace, rejected by a number of London clubs, including the likes of Millwall. Fell out of love with football, was playing basketball and gaming and stuff, and ended up coming back into it through the Bristol City Academy, and is to build back up from there to the brink of the move he's got is a fabulous story in itself. But then you just look at how he's leaving Bournemouth. I mean, I can't think of a player leaving a club in a better way. He's played throughout the Christmas period while being on the brink of a move. He plays against Tottenham last night. He scores a worldie with his last kick of the ball, and he leaves with everyone wishing him the best. I mean, that doesn't happen very often in football. So, he's a great story, and he's my hero.
Yeah, a good choice, and it should be said he played those final two games for Bournemouth after the deal between Manchester City and Bournemouth was done, because Bournemouth asked him to help them out for those last two games. And again, you're talking about the unusual nature of his development pathway. We rarely see that in football these days. How often in modern football do we see a player who's got a move ready to go to one of the biggest clubs in the world in terms of sporting achievement, prepared to play through and risk injury in two more games before he has his medical?
So I can't. No, it's unprecedented, isn't it? I mean, if he'd said, "Look, lads, I've played for you while the move was going through. Now the move's pretty much through, and I need to just not get injured and not play," I think everyone would have understood it. But to actually answer the call, Bournemouth needed him. Bournemouth were on a bad run. They needed that goal, that winner that he scored, to arrest the slide. So to go and do that and put himself second while on the brink of that move is absolutely brilliant.
So villain of the week, and a regular winner of this award in the Transfers podcast, Gianni Infantino, who, after creating the FIFA Peace Prize and bestowing it upon Donald Trump, and I quote, "on behalf of the billions of people who love this game and want peace," I'm still waiting for Gianni to hear his views of the American peacemaker, the great American peacemaker, bombings at Venezuela, kidnapping its president and taking control of another state. To quote Gianni again, "This is what we want from a leader. You definitely deserve the first FIFA Peace Prize for your action, for what you've attained in your way, but you obtained it in an incredible way. And you can always count, Mr. President, on my support." Instead, Gianni's been in Las Vegas this week presenting the new Motorola Razr FIFA World Cup 26 phone. A beautiful phone for the best event and the biggest event, according to Gianni, which sounds like a line scripted by his pal Donald.
I can't believe the cynicism. I mean, this guy's he's just trying to do his best for football, Duncan. He's trying to spread love around the world. He's trying to heal the wounds of our broken society through the power of football. And, you know, that Peace Prize was a very rigorous process where lots and lots of people were consulted and it went to, you know, person that, although I'd questioned the recipient, I'm sure Gianni's beyond question, really. I'm sure it was well thought through and well deserved. And I don't know, if more people were positive about football, like Gianni is, the world would be a better place, Duncan. Come on. It's just a shame Venezuela aren't in the World Cup, because that would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yes, let's see if that challenge from FIFA to Infantino over an organisation that always wanted to stay out of politics in the past. It's quite a radical change.
Yeah, my God. Yeah. No, I mean, surely you need to just basically make a trophy as big as that Peace Prize for Villain of the Week and find a way to send it to Gianni.
It's not a bad idea. Should we make it a bust of Donald Trump?
Yeah. Well, he strikes me as the type that would actually put any trophy he received up in his office, and I might not even look at what was written on it. So yeah, try it.
It's, on his Instagram feed. Good publicity. Johnny, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Great chatting with you as always.
Thanks, Duncan. All the best.
Cheers. You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you like what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter, Blue Sky and TikTok address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Jonathan is at J Northcroft. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.